the desk. Now, our speaker today, finally getting to you, Hannah. Hannah Jacobson, as I've heard from council members here in Salisbury, as well as through the grapevine from the manager, is one of the treasures in the staffing of Salisbury. She's a planning director here, and they're in the process of trying to look ahead for the next 10 years. And so she knows a whole lot about new developments, what's going on, planning for it, getting yourself certified if you have a historic home. You can talk to Mr. Getz back here about that, all kinds of stuff related to housing. But there's one other thing that I want you to note about as Hannah is coming up here to speak. This last week there was a letter to the editor in the paper talking about a children's Bill of Rights, that maybe if the legislature would pass a children's Bill of Rights, they wouldn't get shot at so much in school. And there was a fellow named Jacobson who wrote that. A guy named Andrew. Do you know that guy by chance?
A little, yeah.
A little. You share some kids with him?
A couple kids, yeah, a couple kids.
But really an excellent article saying, come on, legislature, stop goofing around on the edges and do something real to protect children. Hannah Jacobs, our planning director.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you, Jeffrey. Thanks so much for the invitation to be here. Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Awesome, great. So I've been in Salisbury for about 4 years now. I've had the privilege of being the city's planning director, as Jeffrey said. But as he also alluded to, I think I hold another title, which is mom. And it's oftentimes my more demanding job to be a mom. I have two little ones. I've got a 7-year-old and a 4-year-old. And I want to share that with you because what I do every day before I go to work is I get the kids ready for school. I bring my daughter, who is still in daycare, I bring her to school. I drop her off, around 8 o'clock. So I get to work on time. And then I pick her up at the end of the day, sometimes pushing 5:30. It's a long day at daycare. And I leave her there with people, drop her off, day after day, with people who I trust, people who I love, and I know take excellent care of her. And what really gets to me when I think about it is that the people that are taking care of her day after day are people who are very likely struggling to pay for housing in Salisbury and in Rowan County. And to me, that's the only thing I know. I need to know that there's a problem with housing and kind of the system that is set up. So wanted to thank you for letting me come here today to talk a little bit about housing. There are two sides to the coin, of course, when it comes to housing affordability. There's the income side, and then there's the housing cost side. And I think over the last several years, we've seen a little bit of progress when it comes to increasing housing, or when it comes to increasing income. Some marginal increases there. But that is, being largely outpaced by the increases that we see in costs that we're experiencing: housing-related costs, food-related costs, transportation-related costs. And so, quick question: has anybody heard of the term cost burdened? Okay, I see a couple nods. I want to point you to the direction of this. I put out a couple of these handouts out on the tables. If you could get this, I'm going to kind of walk through the sheet. I can't take credit for it. This is a handout and I've got extras here if anybody needs extras. This is a handout that was created by the North Carolina Housing Coalition, and it's for Rowan County. It's a fact sheet. There are fact sheets for every single county in North Carolina for, up to date. This is for the year 2023. So the term cost burden relates to housing affordability. Experts at HUD and kind of national experts say that people should not spend more than 30% of their income on housing-related expenses. That includes rent, it includes your mortgage, it includes any taxes, it includes any bills that you have related to housing. So you should not spend more than 30% of your income on housing. And what this shows us is that in Rowan County, a quarter, 25% of people are spending more than 30% of their income on housing. So they're considered cost burdened. That's about 13,000 households. And I think we all know that housing affordability can be an issue kind of across the housing, kind of an income spectrum. You can be high income and still struggle to pay for housing, but it's most acutely felt, of course, for people who are low income. If you dig a little bit deeper into the data, there's something else called severely cost burdened. If you're severely cost burdened, that means that you're spending more than 50%, more than half of your income on housing. And this is not on the sheet, but I looked it up. In Rowan County, we have 7% of families, households, are spending more than half of their income on housing. That's 2,500 households that are spending that much. And I think that's just like pause and think about that, because it's really, you have to make some impossible choices when you're spending that much money on housing in any given month. You're sacrificing childcare, you're making a decision about whether or not you're gonna pay for medical expenses, you're thinking about food, you're thinking about transportation. You have to make some impossible choices when you're spending that much money on housing. And one of the things that people sacrifice, and we see this a lot at the city, people sacrifice quality. They sacrifice quality housing. And that, of course, can be harmful to, your health, and can lead to greater and greater instability kind of throughout your life. So at the city of Salisbury, we do a number of things to try to counteract that. One of the programs that we have, we're very fortunate, we get community development block grant funds, and the city council supplements it with extra funding from the general fund to do housing rehab. So we do housing rehab for low-income people, and that can significantly help people stay in their homes longer and live comfortable lives. Of course, it's expensive, right? I mean, in the last 5 years or so, we've spent $1.6 million and affected 50 homeowners. So, the money is wonderful. These are great programs, but it doesn't go as far as we would like it to go. Another thing that we do with the city, of course, and I know that other jurisdictions in Rowan County do this as well, is we have code enforcement officers that look at minimum housing standards. And they do great work. They address vacant and blighted properties, but they also respond to complaints about minimum housing conditions, most often from renters. And that's a great program. We have good results working with landlords when we know about it. The trouble is that we don't know about it most often, right? I mean, you've got tenants who are afraid, rightfully so, to complain. Maybe they don't know where to go. And that's something that I think we need to work on, is education. But at the same time, even if they did know where to go, there's a concern that, what's gonna happen to me if I complain? So that puts a significant burden on tenants, and I wish we had a way around that. In other places, there are rental inspection processes. And oftentimes if you own a utility, like an electrical utility, you can get an inspector in between tenants. And I wish we had something like that, but our hands are a little bit tied at the state legislature with that. So that's something to think about. A little bit more about housing. I was talking about kind of housing conditions and some of the things that the city is doing to address kind of some of the quality issues related to housing. There's more work to be done, but we are proactive in that. But if you dig a little bit more into this data related to cost burden, you see that, of course, renters are more vulnerable to the cost burden condition than homeowners. 44% of renters in Rowan County are cost burdened, compared to 18% of homeowners. And again, this is a little problematic. This is a little interesting because renters are, as we were talking about, a little bit more vulnerable. They're vulnerable to discrimination. Issues of fair housing go unreported all of the time. We do have a mechanism to report fair housing violations. Again, it gets back to education. This is Fair Housing Month, and so this is a good month and to raise awareness about housing discrimination. We will be having a lunch and learn April 26th, and I failed to bring information about that, so I apologize. Yesterday's holiday kind of threw me off a little bit. But yeah, renters are vulnerable to a lot of different things. Housing discrimination, they're vulnerable to rent increases. And we've seen that a lot recently over the last couple of years. Since 2018 in Rowan County, rents have increased 38%. I don't know anybody who's gotten a 38% raise in that amount of time. And then, of course, they're also vulnerable to eviction. And we'll talk a little bit more about eviction a little bit later. Digging even deeper into the data, you start to see that there's even greater disparities within thinking about cost burden when you look at race and ethnicity. African Americans, 49%, and this is in Salisbury, not Rowan County. I didn't pull this data, but in Salisbury, there are 49% of African Americans are cost burden, and that's compared to 27% of white. And I think for Hispanic, there's 40%. So there's a significant disparity when it comes to who is cost burden. Next. So terminology, I think, is troubling sometimes around affordable housing. You hear the terms affordable housing, public housing, subsidized housing, and a term that's really in vogue right now is called workforce housing. There's no set definition for what workforce housing means exactly, but I think I kind of like the term because it goes to show that people who we see and who we rely on, those childcare workers that we interact with all the time and are so important, they are essential workers during COVID. There are people who are struggling to pay for housing. Mm-hmm. And the sheet here, I think, does a really good job showing healthcare workers, childcare workers, police officers, farming labor. It shows their average annual salaries and compares it to what you actually need to make in Rowan County to afford what's called fair market value rent. So this study showed that you need to make at least $39,200 per year in order to comfortably afford rent for a 2-bedroom apartment in Rowan County. And you can see where that stacks up. Healthcare workers can't afford it, childcare workers can't afford it, farming labor can't afford it, and those are really important members of our community. So people that we see, people that we are familiar with, they're struggling. These are kind of our workforce. So the term workforce housing has become more and more popular. So what do you do if your income, if you are a healthcare worker and your income doesn't qualify you for kind of standard traditional market rate housing? You might get a second job. You might end up paying too much for your housing and become one of the numbers of people who are cost burdened. You might be one of the lucky few people who actually live in income restricted housing. Show of hands, who's heard of public housing? Okay, good. So in Salisbury, I'm going to speak specifically about Salisbury. We have a Salisbury Housing Authority. It's unaffiliated with the city of Salisbury. There are, I think, and I pulled this number out of thin air this morning, but I think it's accurate. I think we have 523 units in Salisbury that are kind of what you might think of traditional public housing. Anybody heard of Section 8 housing? Mm-hmm. Okay, great. So we've got 2 entities in this area that hold Section 8 vouchers. They are the East Spencer Housing Authority and the Rowan County Housing Authority. Again, they're not affiliated with the county governments or the local government. Last count that I had, we had about 800 vouchers available, not available, we had 800 vouchers within the city of Salisbury. None are available at the moment. There is an extremely long wait list. Okay, anybody heard of low-income housing tax credits? Okay, a few of you have. Now, low-income housing tax credits are one of the best ways to create income restricted housing. And they're really great because what they've done is they leverage market forces, people who want to make money with a public good. And you know, when it comes to creating affordable housing, we're not going to get there through altruism. So leveraging some of those market forces is really important. So people are able to get tax incentives in exchange for keeping rents affordable for a period of 15 years. So since the 1980s, the program has been offered through a group called the North Carolina Housing Finance Agency. And most of the apartment complexes that you see kind of throughout Salisbury that have been built recently, Gold Hill Apartments, there's been several off of Statesville Boulevard, like Britton Village, Westbrook Trace, which is on Lash Drive. Those are examples of low-income housing tax credit projects. And they have income restrictions for the folks that live there. And so you have to essentially qualify to live there, and you will not pay more than 30% of your income on housing. So those are kind of three different ways that there are, you know, traditional kind of public housing units, there's Section 8 housing, there's low-income housing tax credit projects. So those are kind of three of the ways that we can guarantee that there's income restricted housing and affordable housing. Again, but they're not necessarily through the local government. The housing authorities, again, they're kind of separate. They're funded through HUD, but it's not something that we have local control over. When it comes to low-income housing tax credits, you know, one things that we can do is we can look at what public land that we have available. We can look at to make sure that their sites are good for those types of projects. If they request a rezoning, we can think about what we need to do in order to get that land rezoned. But it's a bit of a hands-off approach that the local government can take. So thinking about eviction. Eviction is kind of that last little section in yellow down at the bottom of the sheet. Rowan County is not doing so well. If you think about eviction as an indicator of housing instability, compared to other counties across the state, we're really high. We're number 18. So that means that we've got, on an annual basis, around 1,400 households who are suddenly have nowhere to go when they are evicted. And so what do? They might move to another county. They might find another place to live where they're perhaps paying too much. They might end up at Rowan Helping Ministry shelter. They may end up on the street. And oftentimes, by the time that we hear from people who are facing eviction, it's a little too late. You know, the order has already been issued. They try to get code enforcement involved, and at that point, it's too late. So one of the things that I would very much like to say is that we see a lot of month-to-month leases for folks who are especially low income. And I think people think, oh great, I've got a lease. It's gonna give me flexibility if this doesn't work out. But it oftentimes is just, it's just a way for a landlord to evict people with very little notice. So it's really important to educate people about the importance of longer term leases. Now sometimes people need to be evicted, and I hate to say that, but we see it oftentimes with criminal activity in rental properties and in our neighborhoods. And so a couple years ago, we did create a program at the city. It's called the RAP program, Remedial Action Plan program. And it's a program that helps to track crime in rental properties. And then it's a voluntary registration program for landlords. Landlords can sign up so that they know what's going on in their properties. I used to be surprised by this, that people wouldn't know what's going on, but I'm not really surprised by that anymore. So it's a way that they can get notified every single time there's a call for service at their property. And if it kind of crosses the threshold of severity and frequency, the landlord gets brought in and a conversation is had between our staff and then the police department about what steps can be taken. And sometimes that step is to pursue an eviction. I have some information about the RAP program, brochure that we can share with people, happy to do that. So I'm proud about what the city has been able to do when it comes to housing affordability. Everything from code enforcement to programs like block work, to our RAP programs, to our rehab programs, to our CDBG programs. Happy to elaborate on any of those if you've got some questions about them. I'm really proud about what we've done. I think we've got a good track record. Could more be done? Yes, of course. More could be done. And especially as we think about how Rowan County is changing. The programs that we have been in place for quite some time now. Our county is seeing a lot of growth, a lot of change, upward pressure towards gentrification. And so one of the things that we're doing at the city is we're looking ahead. We're looking to work on what's called a 10-year housing strategy. We're just getting started on this. So I told Jeffrey, I'm not gonna have answers at this meeting. But we're working on, we've got what's called a request for proposals out there to consulting firms who do this type of work, help to work with the community, look at national examples, help us identify, bring partners together. We want to bring everybody who's related to this issue together to talk about it and to understand how we can best use our funds, how we can leverage funds from the private sector, how we can leverage funds that are coming from HUD and other places like the North Carolina Housing Finance Agency, private funds. We want to be able to make sure that we're leveraging all of that. And not only leveraging it, but implementing it. So that's something I'm really grateful to City Council for seeing the need for, first of all, and then hopefully through the budget process, helping to support that work. We hope to begin that process by July with a really intense 12 to 18 month focus. So we will keep you posted. That's one of my to-dos for you all, is to keep abreast of that plan as it proceeds. I'm not scared of what that plan is of doing that plan. I'm really excited for it. I'm nervous about the implementation part of it, when we realize the mountain that we have to climb to address some of these issues. And so I think at that point, that will be a wonderful time to stay tuned, stay abreast, and think about how we can advocate towards moving it forward. Thank you.